Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. Hey, what's up, audience? It's Scott Groves with the On the Edge podcast, and today on Scott's Thoughts, hey, I like how that rolled off the tongue, like we actually named the segment. That's pretty cool. We're evolving, bro. We're going to talk about some breastfeeding and some idiot doctors. We're going to talk about some historically black colleges, which is actually not the story. It's the story of the COVID CARES Act, aka the bill that we passed, oh, Jesus, a while ago, like in March, how it's just wasting money left and right, and how basically both parties are just using an absurd amount of money of wasteful spending to buy votes. So we're going to talk about that. And then, we're coming to you in, let's see, what's the day today? August 18th? It's August 18th. It's a Wednesday. We're going to actually edit this overnight so it can be up and running by Thursday, August 19th, because there's obviously the developing situation of Afghanistan. We'll get into that. I'm very opinionated on Facebook. I'm very opinionated in our Facebook group for the On the Edge podcast. And even my sister texted me 2 days ago and she's like, hey, I haven't seen an opinion from you on Afghanistan. And so I'll tell you why I kind of delayed judgment and opinion for about the better half of a week. But I think it's time to give some opinions on that. So let's jump right into breastfeeding, right? And I haven't been able to confirm this. Maybe there's an outside chance this is a meme or a Photoshop, but I'm pretty sure this is the case. So Chris, maybe you can just fact check this because I didn't think about it. The guy who posted it, a friend of mine, Mitch Peak back east, I trust him. He doesn't go to a lot of fake news sites, but this is from the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine on gender inclusion language. Obviously, this was on Fox News. Fox News likes to push the idea that, trans people are going to take over the world. And Fox News likes to scare their audience that there's going to be a ton of, men dressed like women walking into your children's bathrooms. A lot of that is just hyperbolic, and it's just made to rile up the base. However, we eventually get to a point where language and science matters, right? And let's be clear. Oh, by the way, I just have to say, shout out to Kyle at Genuine Cigars. If you ever make it up to Stevenson's Ranch, Valencia, California area, which really the only reason people come up here unless they live here is to go to Magic Mountain. But if you come up here and you're a cigar smoker or you're a cigar aficionado, you have to go to Genuine Cigars in Valencia. I don't even get paid to say this, because Kyle, the guy who owns that place, is amazing. And today he gave me this, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of this because my Spanish is horrible, Joya de Nicaragua. And it's the Antonio, the big boy, the big gauge. And I remember the first time I smoked one of these are expensive cigars. I think they're probably wholesale $12, $15, which means in California, they probably sell for $25 to $35. The first time I smoked one of these cigars, I almost passed out. There was so much nicotine in it. Luckily, that was a couple years ago before I was smoking so many cigars, which my wife is not a huge fan of. But man, what a beastly, awesome cigar. So I will be trying to keep this lit while we're talking. But we got a lot to talk about. So words matter, right? Words matter.
Also, the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine is a thing. It does exist. And the statement is at the very top of their website. So it's awesome. Not just a Fox News.
Not just a Fox News craziness. Okay. So here's the thing. I can't imagine, other than being forced at gunpoint to kill a family member, rape somebody, I can think of few things that are lower on my list of things that I would do than cut off my own penis. So look, if you're transgender, you want to cut off your penis, you're a woman that thinks you're a man, you want to take testosterone so your clitoris grows into a giant penis, by all means, do whatever you want. It's your body. It's all about you. I will be respectful of those people when I come in contact with them. But at some point, we cannot have personal feelings. Some would say mental challenges. Some would say personality disorder. What's it called? Sexual dysmorphia is how they used to call it until about the last 10 years. It doesn't matter what your opinion is on it. The jump to then have kind of these political opinions or these social thoughts or this social justice, which, that has become a negative connotation from the right. But who doesn't want to have social justice? Sometimes I think that gets bastardized. I don't care. Do whatever you want with your body. Be respectful of people that want to do whatever they want to do with their body. However, there's still science, right? There's still X chromosomes, Y chromosomes. They make up men and women. You are still born either a man or woman. And I know somebody will take issue with that and say, well, there's 0.0001% of the population that are born hermaphrodites with both sexual organs. Yes, that's a super rarity. But for the most part, people are born either a man or a woman. And it takes a woman, sorry guys, it takes a woman to have a uterus and to have eggs and gestate a baby and breastfeed. But now the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine would like us to not call it breastfeeding because breastfeeding is no longer gender inclusive language. And I'm already choking on my cigar here. So gender inclusive language, and I don't even know what that means. I don't know if that means we don't want to be disrespectful to women because we're talking about their breasts. I don't know if gender inclusion means because there's men that think they're women. Spoiler alert, even if you're a man who thinks you're a woman or feels like a woman trapped inside of a man's body and you cut off your penis and you get breast implants, you don't have the same breast tissue as women. You cannot breastfeed, right? This is not even debatable in the scientific community, apparently, unless you're a scientist or a doctor that is part of the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine. But it's just crazy, right? So instead of breastfeeding, we should use chest feeding or human milk feeding. And instead of breast milk, we should call it lactating parents' milk. I don't get it. I really don't get it. I remember the very first time this happened. It was at a barbecue probably 15 years ago. Yeah, probably 15 years ago. And a good friend of my father's, we were at this big barbecue, family, friends, and whatnot. A big friend of my father's had just gone off to college. He just done his freshman year of college. And it was kind of interesting because we were having a barbecue and somebody said something, we were talking about politics, something about illegal aliens came up, and he lost his shit, right? And it was like, no. It's not illegal aliens. It's undocumented aliens, undocumented citizens, undocumented, whatever the case may be. And we're like, hey, well, if you come to the country without documentation, you have broke the law, therefore you're illegal, right? And this is kind of like the 1984 where you keep outlawing more and more language over the course of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 40 years. We've been fighting the culture war. And then one day you wake up and you're not even allowed to say that there's a difference between men and women, or you're not allowed to say that women are the ones that breastfeed milk from their breast. And somehow we have to change this language so that we're not insulting. I don't even know what crowd this is trying to prevent insulting. Like, I actually know 2 people that are transvestites, and they don't care if you use the word breast. They also don't care if you say, hey, man, good for you. At the end of the day, you'll never be able to have a kid or breastfeed. Like, that's just a fact. They know it. I know it. We all know it. And the fact that we're all trying to convince ourselves into this grand delusion by changing the words, and it feels very 1984's newspeak. And by the way, if you haven't read 1984, if your 10th grade English teacher, who I wish I could remember my 10th grade English teacher because I loved him, but not enough to remember his name. If he didn't make you read it in high school, please go back and reread it. It's a little hard to get through, actually. The prose are kind of weird. I reread it a couple of years ago, and it's not a particularly easy book to get through, which is probably why it's assigned reading and not like recreational reading. But just the correlations between how he explained the government and society would start to control your thoughts through your words. This is the stuff that's happening. Now, my first thought was Fox News loves to make a mountain out of a molehill. Like, I won't watch Fox News just like I won't watch MSNBC. So my first thought was like, all right, this is some fringe group of crazy pre-med students. There's 8 of them. They're at a college. They banded together and created the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine just so that they could make a political point and say crazy stuff like this, right? So I looked up the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine, and I'm glad Chris just went to their website because, first of all, you go to their website and it's like, all right, cool, their mission, da-da-da. And then the funny part is history, a legacy of scientific rigor, Well, effectively with your newspeak here, you're trying to claim that there's really not a difference between men and women and breast tissue and non-breast tissue. You've kind of already lost me on your scientific rigor, right? And so I'm like, all right, well, let me dig a little deeper because anybody can put up a website these days. Let me go to their board of directors. And I went to their board of directors, and these are serious fucking people. Allison Stube, medical doctor. I don't know what MSC, how funny, MSC is, or FABN. I don't know what all these other letters are for these people after the MD. That's the only one I know. But, University of North Carolina School of Medicine, University of Virginia Health System, Children's National Health System. Some of these are kind of weak. University of California School of Medicine, San Diego, UCSD, Cambridge Health Alliance. There was somebody on here that was Southern Illinois University School of Medicine. So these are doctors. These are highly educated women. These look to be all women who were born as women, presumably, and who have breast tissue and who can breastfeed, right? And look, there's a corollary here. Because when 3, 6, 9, 12, when 12 or 15 prominent doctors and healthcare officials come out and try to convince the general population that we shouldn't call it breastfeeding, that we should call it, let's go back. I can't even make these words up. Like, it's like life is crazier than comedy, crazier than the movies, crazier than fiction. Chest feeding, human milk feeding. Yeah. So my wife, God bless her, had challenges doing her human milk feeding. So, we only breastfeed our kids for X amount of months instead of the prescribed 9 months or whatever you're supposed to do these days. And I'm going to go back and say, honey, it really wasn't breastfeeding as hard as you worked. It was human milk feeding, or lactating parents milk, because I would be upset as the man if I somehow couldn't also breastfeed. It's just crazy, right? So then,
but I was like reading the official statement, and the way Fox Newsed it is that they're not telling people to use those terms. They're pretty much acknowledging that for non-gender people, that they acknowledge these terms for non-gendered people. There's a table if you click the article, and the table even says the terms on the left are not incorrect and are appropriate in many settings, but the terms in the middle column are suitable substitutes when gender inclusive language is appropriate. So that's just.
But gender language matters when you're talking about breastfeeding.
I just wanted to put.
No, but you should not cut this part out. This is important. Leave this in here because I appreciate. Where am I clicking this chart?
It's the chart at the bottom of the third page of their statement.
Oh, I have the about section. Okay, here we go. A medical position statement.
So yeah, the whole thing's there. I was kind of glancing through it, but at the bottom of the third page is table 1.
Keep this all on the podcast. I appreciate you checking me if we have stuff that we need to
look so at. I think what Fox News is trying to say is, everybody needs to start using these new terms. But I think what they're actually saying is they're acknowledging these terms for medical use, as opposed to telling everyone they have to use these terms.
But here's the thing. There's nothing that's more gender specific than breastfeeding.
I agree with that.
That's the number 2 gender specific thing. Like, women can have children. Well, maybe it's number 3. Men have a penis. Women have a vagina. You can choose to do with those organs what you want. Number 2 primary biological, medical, gender issue is women can give birth and men produce sperm. There's sperm and there's eggs. And number 3 is who can breastfeed? I mean, oh my God, I get it. And I appreciate you pointing that out, Chris, because I do agree. That's why I wanted to make sure that this was a real group, because Fox News can very Fox News-ish some stuff. But it's still fucking crazy. I don't get it. And these are serious people. And the point that I was trying to make, thank you for interrupting me, Chris. The point that I was trying to make is like, look, there's a lot of confusion about why a large percentage of the country does not trust medical professionals. They don't trust Dr. Fauci when he says to get vaccinated. They don't trust so-and-so when they talk about this. They don't trust the pharmaceutical companies. They don't trust their own doctor. I'm seeing a lot of stuff come up on like Twitter and Instagram where it's like people are now filming secretly from their purse as their doctor tries to like shame them into getting vaccinated. When you see shit like this, it erodes trust in the public institutions, which, even though a lot of doctors are privately paid, most of them are publicly educated at schools that get all schools get public funds. So, doctors, we'll just say, are part of the public health, kind of whatever you want to consider. It's part of the apparatus, right? It's part of, I would say, public institutions that we either trust or don't trust. And when we see shit like this, especially in a time like now, of course people start to distrust their doctors, right? And it's nuts to me. These look like very serious people. These are all people that are infinitely more educated than I am. Maybe a lot of them are way smarter than I am, but it's just, come on, man. You have to know your audience. This stuff is just kind of crazy. Anyway, moving on. I don't want to spend more than 10 minutes on that. And thank you for fact checking, Chris. Thank you for looking into the underlying paper, because that's what we always want to do here. We want to go to the actual press releases. We don't want to read an editorial of an opinion of a press release that was trying to analyze the original source document when, surprise, surprise, internet, you can always go to the source document, which we're going to do right now. All right, guys. Story number 2 comes to us from NPR. HBCUs, which is historically Black universities that have almost predominantly Black enrollment, they got a student debt federal fund student loan repayment program, basically a forgiveness program. And look, the important part of the story here is not HBCU, right? The important part of the story is not that the students that got the forgiveness program are from historically Black colleges and universities. Now, we could have a very interesting story or a very interesting Scott's thoughts or conversation about what does it look like in the Black community to accumulate student debt? How quickly do they pay them off in comparison with Asian students, Hispanic students, white students? That would be a really good conversation. But for this point, I'm just going to talk about government wasteful spending. I don't care if this HBCU said UCLA or all Asian students or all white students. It's just the same wasteful federal spending in an attempt to buy votes. And so I want to immediately dispel that any of this has anything to do with the fact that these forgiveness programs went to a certain type of student or a certain class of people or a certain set of universities. That doesn't matter. And where Fox News will cherry pick stories and kind of Fox News them, I think NPR and CNN and MSNBC does all the same stuff. I don't think they would be running this story of hope and this anecdotal story about this girl and why it's so meaningful for her to have her student loans forgiven and yada, yada, yada. I don't think they would be running this unless there was a class of people, whether that be any minority group, you can pick any minority group, that they're trying to highlight or pick a story or tell a certain narrative, right? And so let's just get rid of HBCUs and just start with erasing student debt with federal funds brings hope for students, right? Well, guess what? If I woke up tomorrow and all of a sudden $7,000, $17,000, $70,000 of debt was like forgiven from me, that would bring me a lot of hope too. If all of a sudden my mortgage was $17,000 lower, $70,000 lower, or my truck is paid off. But if my truck was paid off, that would bring me hope, right? Doesn't matter where you're at in a socioeconomic scale. If somebody just gives you free money, you probably have more help. And so I started reading this article because I thought it looked kind of interesting, mostly because I hate when the government just gives shit away. And it turns out that Wigham School, I don't know if it's pronounced Wigham or Wigham. I think it's Wigham. I think the H is silent. Wigham School got 7,946 students who got CARES funds, right? So then we got to look at what the CARES funds are. But I kept reading. The CARES Act, passed in March 2020, gave $1 billion to HBCUs and minority-serving institutions, specifically, more than 20 of the roughly blah, 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 blah. So basically, the government just gave out $1 billion to pay off student loans. Now, I'm sure there was some fighting between the Democrats and the Republicans. Do these go to all schools? Do these go to historical Black colleges and universities? Do these go to underserved minority schools? Do these go to schools that are serving, lower socioeconomic class group of students? Does it go to junior college? It doesn't matter. There's probably some big giant fight over this. And my point is that it was in the CARES Act, right? It was in the CARES Act. So I did a little bit more reading about the $1 billion in emergency aid that's going to so-and-so. And we quickly go from $1 billion to we spent $12 billion. By the way, $12 billion, $12 billion, bigger than any annual budget the government has ever released. $12 billion to go to corona-related stimulus. Actually, double check that. I think I misspoke, because I think the budget, the entire U.S. budget for 2020, I don't know. I think it was $6 trillion. So I just totally made that up. Sorry, fact check myself. $12 billion, corona-related virus. Yeah, I was thinking trillion. I mistaked billion and trillion. And by the way, trillion is 1,000 billion. These numbers are so big, you can't even comprehend them sometimes. I can't comprehend them often. Okay, so $12 billion in corona-related stimulus funding went. And so let's go to the CARES Act, right? Because somehow $1 billion got dispersed in emergency aid to colleges. I'm going to take out the HBC or the HBCU because that part doesn't matter. I don't care about that. And other colleges like TCU that serve primarily minority institutions, that they were serviced as well. So again, it doesn't matter who it went to. The fact is that it went at all. So if you go to the CARES Act and you can look up, you just go to congress.gov and you can look up any bill that's ever been passed by the Congress or the Senate, right? And so you see here, this is the Senate bill, which then got revised. Then it went back to the House of Representatives, and then the House of Representatives passed this into law. Oh my goodness, I can't believe this. Almost 18 months ago, March of 2000 is when the first, I think this was $3 trillion, $3 billion. Gosh, I keep messing up trillion and billion. I'm going to lose all my, my street cred here if I keep messing those up. I think it was $3 billion went out in, maybe you can see that. What was the total funding for the CARES Act, Chris? So you can go to the HR bill that was passed into law. You can go to the Senate bill, which then you could actually compare the two if you were really bored and see what the revisions are. You can see the full text, the summary, whatever the case may be. So let's just go to the full text of HR 748 of the 116th Congress, the CARES Act that got passed into law. And what I first did, because what was funny, is I was first looking at the Senate version of the bill. So you just go Control F. First, I like to double check that like it's actually searching the whole text of the bill. So I'll put in something like government, or another word that shows up often is the Treasury. So you can see, like, you can make sure, first of all, that your Control F is actually searching the entire scope of the bill, which you can see how long this is. I mean, these bills are hundreds of pages, if not thousands of pages. So I accidentally went to the Senate bill because I forgot that the Senate made some revisions and then the House actually passed it. And I just looked up, okay, college. Not a single mention of college. What about university? Not a single mention of university. What about education? Okay, so we've got a lot of educational provisions. These are emergency grants, continuing education, national emergency education waivers, and here you go, HBCU capital financing. Now, let's just, to make sure we're doing the right thing here, let's go to the bill that was actually passed into law, because there is a lot of changes that happen in between. Okay, so there is some HBCU capital financing. HBCU capital financing in general, notwithstanding any provisions of Title III, higher education, yada, 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 yada. And it will tell you right here what the plan was, right? Capital financing, right? That sounds like, capital financing. Maybe we're trying to capitalize COVID tests, or infrastructure is the new big thing in the bill that was just passed, right? And it talks all about what we shall not do, what we shall do. I mean, these bills are just overwhelming, but you can read them. And I recommend you do if you have a particular problem with something that you see on Fox News or MSNBC about how money was spent. And it just talks about where this is all appropriated. And it's like, what the fuck does this have to do with COVID? What does forgiving student loans have to do with securing the country and a public health issue and a pandemic? It has nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. And this is just another example of a government boondoggle. You can probably guess which party put this section in there to buy what type of demographic of votes. And it's just buying votes with our own money. And this is just one small example. I'm sure we could go. Did you find the total spending on government spending and then the CARES Act? I think CARES was $3 billion.
So I'm at hhs.gov,
Mm-hmm.
and there were 3 phases. The first phase was $46.02 billion. The second phase was $5.98 billion. And the third phase was $24.5 billion.
So we're at about $80 billion in COVID relief. And what was the total federal budget for 2020?
That was 6.6 trillion.
6.6 trillion. So it's like about 1% to 2% of the budget. What's 80 billion divided by 6 trillion?
I don't know.
Hey Google. Hey Google. What's 80 billion divided by 6 trillion?
The answer is approximately 0.01
times 100. So it's like 1%. Like 1% of the budget went to 1% of the budget went to COVID. Okay. Seems like it should have been more. Anyway, my point is, again, I don't care whether or not the government and the taxpayers and citizens decide that we want to fund higher education. That's probably plenty of arguments in favor of that. I don't care if there was a longer discussion, maybe that one day we'll have on this podcast, that there's a reason to favor certain types of colleges or certain types of educational institutions. That's probably a fair conversation. But for it to sneak its way into a COVID relief bill is just crazy. And I just want Americans to understand that these politicians suck. And all they care about is getting into power and staying into power. There's a great book called The Dictator's Handbook that was written by, who is this written by? I'm going to look this up. Dictator's Handbook. I think it was a professor from Stanford. Dictator's Handbook. There we go. Why bad behavior is almost always good politics. Excellent book. And I think Bruce is a professor of politics at New York University and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, which is at Stanford. So he probably teaches at both. And then Alistair, he does not have there he is. No, he does not have an author's page. Well, that's a bummer. Maybe he was just an editor or something. So great book, how it talks about politicians, all of their bad behavior, all of their kickbacks, all their special interest spending, all the gluttonous amount of money that they're using to put us into massive amounts of debt as a country. It's good politics, right? Because they know that they're just carving out all these little special interest groups and they're buying your votes with your money. Remember, there is no such thing as government spending. There is no such thing as government spending. There is government takes money from taxpayers, or they take money from corporations, or they make things more expensive for us through fees and license requirements. And then they spend that money back on us to buy votes for themselves. It's crazy. It's crazy. And you got to look at things with a skeptical eye and an analytical eye when you start thinking things like, I don't know, we're just going to spend $80 billion. And does anybody really feel, other than the fact that a vaccine got developed at rapid pace and probably a scientific miracle with a lot of government funding, does anybody really feel like the government's done a whole lot to make the situation a whole lot better over the last 18 months? I think most people would disagree. So those are my thoughts on the Dictator's Handbook and how we're just wasting a glut of money in these stupid COVID bills. All right, let's move on to Afghanistan. There is a reason why Afghanistan is kind of something that I've paid a lot of attention to for the last 20 years. And I think if you would have asked most Americans 6 weeks ago, are there still troops in Afghanistan? Are there thousands of contract troops, the Blackwaters, the people that retire from the military, then they go into private security? Are there thousands of contractors, military contractors, currently in Afghanistan supporting the Afghan National Army? Are there thousands of U.S. citizens, reporters, people that work for NGOs, people that work for nonprofits? Are there thousands of Americans in Afghanistan? I think most Americans would be hard pressed to know the answer to that question. And I think 90% of Americans probably can't spell Afghanistan and or find it on a map. So it's interesting that this is now catapulted into the, public zeitgeist and everybody's talking about it. Everybody's having an opinion. Now, for the record, any of you guys have been watching for a while know that I barely graduated high school. I didn't finish college, and I'm like pretty much half a moron. So my opinion, take it with a grain of salt. But here's a couple things that I might have a little bit of an opinion on this that's a little bit valuable. And in the summer of 2000, so a year and a half before 9/11, I was in the Army. I was in Fort Riley, Kansas, bored out of my mind. And I was training with 3 other guys to go to what's called Special Force Selection. So if you want to be a Green Beret, you go to this month-long selection process where they just put you through this physical, rigorous hell. That's kind of their weeding out process to see who will snap mentally, who's physically weak, who can't get along with people and work in a kind of leadership environment. And then if you pass that, then you go to a year-long course for most people where you learn a certain specialty, and you go through this thing called Robin Sage, which is like a month-long it's kind of like role-playing. It's kind of like cosplaying. You go out there as a soldier in North Carolina, and there's a bunch of farms around the military base, and a bunch of the farmers play insurgents, good guys, bad guys, whatever. And then if you pass that, you get your Green Beret, which is, I think you get your Green Beret. So in the summer of 2000, I was training to go to that month-long selection course. And myself and 3 other people in our duty station, they got approved to go. We passed the little swim physical, and I think it was a 12-mile road march, and you had to score the physical fitness test, and you had to do some other stuff. So we passed that. We're getting ready to go to the 30-day selection process, which, by the way, there was 4 of us. We were all similar physical fitness. One of the guys kind of had an attitude problem, and not surprisingly, he rolled his ankle in the 30-day training and got sent back. And we never really got the whole story. I suspect in a moment of frustration, exhaustion, whatever, he probably lost his mind, and they were like, "Hey, man, you're not the guy for Special Forces." I like to think I could have made it through that 30 days because at 21 years old, I would have been. I was in the best physical shape of my life. I was a pretty good soldier. I was a squad leader, so I had some leadership ability. But as we were getting ready to leave for that, And man, I was in great shape. Man, that was probably like 50 pounds ago. As we were getting ready to leave for that, I can't remember what they call him, but the guy who re-enlists you in the Army, if you're getting ready, if you're coming to the end of your term and re-enlisting, he came to me and he said, hey, Scott, you're ETSing, end term service. That means you get out of the Army. You're getting out of the Army in September of 2000, and we're not sending you to the selection process until July or August of 2000. I can't remember what it was. Maybe I was even going to go in September. I don't think so. I think it was in August. And he said, because it's so close to your exit date, we don't want to spend the money on you to go to selection unless you re-enlist. Now, maybe that was true. Maybe that was just some re-enlistment officer trying to get me to re-enlist because that was his job. And I'm like, hey, man, this is kind of my plan. I hate Fort Riley, middle of nowhere in the middle of Kansas. I don't ever want to get stuck with a tank unit again, just cleaning up oil spills for 3 years. So I want to go to selection. And if I make it, great. I'll re-enlist for 6 years, 10 years, 20 years. I don't care because that's what I really want to do. If I don't make it, if I break my ankle, if I get washed out, if I'm not like mentally equipped to do it, then I'm just going to get out in September. And they're like, yeah, sorry, unless you have 6 months left on your contract or a year left on your contract, we're not going to send you. So for like 3 days, I kind of moped around because I was having to make this decision. Would I re-enlist for 3 years, go to this selection process, and then find out whether or not I can make it? And if I didn't make it, get stuck in Kansas for another 3 years. I went and saw the re-enlistment guy. He said, oh, we can do this 6-year program where we get you a guaranteed duty station in Hawaii or wherever you want to go. And it was at that moment, like I just felt like I was getting lied to, kind of like I did when I got recruited. And I just decided, you know what? I'm done with the Army. Too much could go wrong. Maybe I didn't have enough self-confidence. I don't know what it was. So I didn't go to selection. My 3 buddies went. The one who had a bad attitude washed out or rolled his ankle or whatever we want to believe. The other 2 ended up making it into special forces. They left. They got their Green Berets a year later. And it's been pretty hard to keep up with them on social media because at the time when social media was just getting big, all the special forces people were told, don't be on that. We don't know if you'll be compromised. We don't want a bunch of pictures of you online. You might accidentally release some training stuff. So both of those people kind of went dark. They have not been on social media for 20 years. Once in a while, I'll get an email, a text, we'll stay in touch because we've all had the same cell phone number since Fort Riley days. But I feel like I would have made it. I would have made it in July or August or September, whenever selection was. About a year later, I would have been getting out of special forces training around September 11th, 2001. As it is, the exit date on my contract, what I signed the paperwork to leave, is I got out of the Army September 11th, 2000. So 9/11 happens. Almost immediately, we start sending troops to Afghanistan once we realize it was the Taliban and Osama bin Laden who planned the 9/11. Obviously, he was the architect of 9/11. And, I always had this conflict that like maybe the biggest regret or bad decision of my life is not just deciding to go like balls to the wall, go to selection, re-enlist. I would have made it through and I would have been in special forces. Now, my life obviously would have been radically different, or maybe my life would have ended in Afghanistan or Iraq or in a training accident. And so I've always had this weird, like, I don't want to say survivor's guilt because these people that I know that went did not die, thank God. But there's always been this weird thing like, should I have gone? I was a really good soldier. Maybe I could have made a difference. Maybe I could have kept somebody alive. Like this comes up in my mind every once in a while. And I just really like toil over and like, did I make a big mistake? I've got a pretty amazing wife and kids and a great life. So maybe I made the best possible decision. Just all craziness that plays with my mind. So over the last 20 years, I've really kept up with what's gone on with Afghanistan. I have a friend who I won't say too much about, but he's a very, very high ranking officer in special forces. We were childhood friends. We were in Boy Scouts together. And now he's getting promoted to a very high status. He'll be in charge of a large swath of special departments within special forces. So I've got to hang out with him and get his firsthand experience from being in Afghanistan. My tutor, which I've mentioned to several of you that I hired a tutor because I want to sound like a complete dipshit on this podcast. He did several tours in Afghanistan and then went into Ivy League education. And so it's just really stayed really close and near and dear to me. So I'm going to start with this first clip of Biden because let's be clear, Bush Jr. and then Obama and then Trump and then Biden, they did plenty of things wrong. in Afghanistan. And that's not just my opinion. That's the opinion of many generals who have served in that theater of operation. It's the opinion of a lot of people who remember back to the Russians trying to invade Afghanistan and the fact that they failed. So this is not a unique opinion that maybe we either shouldn't have been there, or we should have been there with a more defined mission, or we should have been there for the long haul, AKA forever. But there's this clip of Biden getting interviewed, and what we're talking about specifically is the withdrawal. So we could talk about all the things that Trump messed up. We could talk about all the things Obama messed up. We could talk about all the things George Bush messed up. As it is, I wasn't doing a podcast then. I'm doing a podcast now in 2021. So let's just listen to this real quick.
When you look at what's happened over the last week, was it a failure of intelligence, planning, execution, or judgment?
Look, I don't think it was a failure. Look, it was a simple choice, George. When the Taliban, let me put it another way. When you had the government of Afghanistan, the leader of that government getting in a plane and taking off and going to another country, when you saw the significant collapse of the Afghan troops we had trained, up to 300,000 of them, just leaving their equipment and taking off, that was, that's what happened. That's simply what happened.
But we've all seen the pictures. We've seen those hundreds of people packed into a C-17. We've seen Afghans falling.
That was 4 days ago, 5 days ago.
What did you think when you first saw those pictures?
What I thought was we have to gain control of this. We have to move this more quickly. We have to move in a way in which we can take control of that airport. And we did.
So you don't think this could have been handled? This actually could have been handled better in any way? No mistakes?
No, I don't think it could have been handled in a way that we're going to go back in hindsight and look, but the idea that somehow there's a way to have gotten out without chaos ensuing, I don't know how that happens. I don't know how that happened.
So for you, that was always priced into the decision?
Yes.
Now, I got to say, I think there's a lot wrong with that minute and a half clip, and I can't wait to watch the whole interview. It's airing later tonight after we film this podcast. They released a clip of this exclusive from ABC. Here's my frustration with the commentary from our president. The president is supposed to be a leader. Look, we've got plenty of examples. People are going to start doing the whataboutism. Well, what about Trump and his tweeting? And what about Bush and this? And what about Obama and that? And all these times that they weren't great leaders. We're talking about the present, okay? In the present, the leader is supposed to lead, right? And this idea that anything is a foregone conclusion, I hate it. I hate it when my coaching clients do it. I hate it when my friends do it. I hate it when the president of the United States does it. I hate it when my 5-year-old son does it. When you excuse something by saying, well, it was just a foregone conclusion, what you're doing is you're attempting to, or you're actually doing, you are absolving yourself from all responsibility, right? Let's just say, well, I got arrested for beating my wife because, sometimes wives are annoying, but, it was going to happen because, marriages, you get into fights. And so, I had to throw a left cross and knock her out. Like, people would look at me like, wait, what are you saying was an automatic foregone conclusion? And well, yeah, all couples fight, all couples argue. And sometimes, your spouse just gets annoying. So you got to give a little right hook, a little left hook, right? It's like, I did that backwards, left, right. That's like my son trying to throw the wrong punch. But anytime you say, oh, well, this thing was a foregone conclusion, what you're doing is you're absolving yourself of your personal responsibility or your responsibilities at your job or your responsibilities in the government. Like, I'm not a big fan of Biden. Didn't vote for him. Ironically, didn't vote for Trump either. But I would have had so much more respect for him if he came on and said, hey, the buck stops with me. I'm the commander in chief. We botched this. We screwed this up, right? And there's a couple things about his foregone conclusion. It was not a foregone conclusion that the Afghanistan National Army was going to fall. It was not a foregone conclusion that the Afghanistan president, who we helped install, was going to flee the country on a plane. For the last 18 months, and this can get a little confusing, for the last 18 months in Afghanistan, the Taliban has been gaining some ground in outlying areas, and I could go to a Google map, but I would just bore you. They've been gaining some ground in some outlying areas, but for the most part, Bagram Air Force Base, where the big military presence was, and where there was a prison with 5,000 terrorists who are all now released. So Bagram Air Force, down the road in Kabul, the capital, which was pretty well fortified. It was, part of the new Afghanistan. There was, advertisements up with women showing their face. God forbid. It was working. And for the last 18 months, there was no U.S. soldier deaths. So if you remember, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 18 years ago, tragic that we were fighting for so long. There would be the monthly body counts, right? It'd be 40 soldiers died in Afghanistan, 22 soldiers died in Afghanistan, 140 soldiers died in Afghanistan. Tragic, right? And I have some friends and their families who were greatly affected by that because they lost some loved ones. And I don't say that lightly in casualties. But in the last 18 months, there was no military casualties. Now, caveat there, when the government can say that, or when the military can report that, it's probably because, and I don't know this for sure, it's probably because the military is not doing outbound proactive missions, meaning they're not leaving the base, they're not leaving the wire, as military people would call it, and going out for proactive missions of, arresting people, seeking terrorists, trying to disarm the Taliban, trying to fight with the Taliban. So there was probably a little bit of isolationism in the parts of Afghanistan that were safe, and people staying behind the wire or behind friendly lines where they were encamped and they had, sandbags and walls and concrete barriers and things of that nature. However, just the presence of, and it's drawn down recently before this withdrawal, the forces have drawn down to about 2,500 military soldiers, actual people in the Army, the Marines, the Air Force, doubt the Navy, but maybe Navy SEALs, the Navy. And then there was a couple thousand military contractors who were either, security, some frontline troops potentially, a lot of contractors doing things like fixing aircraft and whatnot. So there were several thousand troops and quasi-troops. I think I looked this up about a year ago. There was 14,000 troops there. And about 2 years ago, there was 25 or 30,000 troops there. I'll have to bring up this infographic. But the point is, the troop strength has been diminishing dramatically in Afghanistan. But there was a presence, right? And just having a small presence of American military where the Taliban knows we can't attack that city, we can't attack that base, we can't find influence there, because if we kill Americans, they're going to surge like we did under Obama. I think the surge was in 2009. We did the surge in Iraq and the surge in Afghanistan, where we pushed more troops in, we pushed the boundaries of where the enemy was back even further. And the Taliban didn't want that again, right? Obviously, they don't want to go back to war with America. And so just in the last 18 months, no military casualties, enough soldiers in strategic places and enough contractors to basically maintain the peace. And this idea, there was a great opinion piece in CNN. And by the way, kudos to the journalistic community for being journalists, right? Asking the hard questions of President Obama, actually doing some reporting on what's going on, releasing, sadly, photos of the atrocities that are going on there as the Taliban hunts down people that they consider are enemies, and people falling from planes because they're desperately trying to get out of the country to America. So kudos to the journalistic society. But there was a great editorial from retired Lieutenant Colonel Jason Amarine, who served in Afghanistan. He talks about what I just talked about a little bit, about this idea of saying, oh, it was always going to fall. It was always going to fall back into Taliban hands. No, that's not the case. That didn't need to happen. And, credit to Obama and credit to Trump when they had their campaign speech of bring the troops home, no more endless wars, yada, yada, yada. Once they got into office and they understood the levity of the situation of hey, if we pull out of there, Kabul is going to fall. The president is going to flee the country. The Taliban is going to take over in days, weeks, or months. Then they said, okay, well, maybe we won't pull all the troops out. Maybe we'll surge. Maybe we'll leave contractors there. Maybe we'll leave permanent bases there. And it wasn't until the end of Trump's term that he ordered the full withdrawal of U.S. soldiers around May 1st. Biden extended that, but now he's saying he was beholden to it. Whatever. We don't have to get into the semantics of that. But basically what was happening is as the withdrawal was happening, we were supposed to make sure that there was still security forces and that the Taliban wasn't taking back over, or we just don't withdraw. right? And so, I don't know why Afghanistan in particular has been this hotbed of bring the troops home when there hasn't been very many military casualties. There's been zero over the last 18 months and not very many at all over the last 2, 3, 4 years. And if you think about it, we still have permanent military bases in Panama from when we permanent military forces in Panama from when we fought Panama for 3 days in the 80s. We still have full-time military bases, many of which my friends have served at in Japan since World War II, South Korea since the Korean War, Germany and Italy since World War II. Basically anywhere where we have gone to fight and U.S. soldiers have died, we have decided as a country, hey, to make sure that doesn't happen again and we just don't get into this endless circle of war, we need to leave long-term military bases in these areas, or guess what? We're just going to be back in 10 or 20 or 30 years. So I'm not saying that there was a perfect plan for Afghanistan. I'm not saying that there was a perfect exit strategy. My humble, uneducated opinion is there shouldn't have been a complete exit strategy. It should have been an idea of keeping some full-time soldiers and full-time bases there. Again, like we have done everywhere else in the country where we've had to fight. And I think it's really worrisome because people are saying that, well, Afghanistan is our next, it's Saigon. It's the next Vietnam. I think that's wrong. I think Afghanistan is the next North Korea because right now, if I want to get on a plane to Vietnam, I can go to Vietnam. It's pretty safe. I would feel very comfortable there. My executive assistant, virtual professional works in Vietnam. We'd go there, we'd have dinner. It's very safe. There's no way I'm going to North Korea. So Saigon fell. We put a lot of political pressure on them through maybe puppet states. Who knows? That's another history lesson for all of us. But basically, Vietnam has more or less adopted a more westernized capitalistic view of society. It's not perfect. No country is, but I would feel comfortable and safe going there. No way I'm booking a ticket to North Korea, nor could I go there if I wanted to. So I think Afghanistan is going to be much more like a North Korea, where for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, or until they attack us again, we're basically just going to turn a blind eye to the civil rights violation that's going on there, because that's what's going to happen. And I will say, I want to play another clip here. Megyn Kelly, who's obviously a right-wing pundit. She was on Fox News for a long time. When she went to CNN and got a giant contract, CNN or MSNBC? Can't remember. When she changed to one of the more liberal networks, she lasted all of about 6 months, and they found an excuse to fire her. But she does a podcast that just started. I find her to be, no pun intended, pretty fair and balanced. She will insult Republicans. She will insult kind of right-leaning philosophy, but she is also a conservative, and she picks on liberals a lot. But there's a really good 2 or 3 minute clip here where her and Charles Cook, who writes for the National Review, and I think he's written for the Wall Street Journal and the Atlantic, really, really intelligent guy. They basically talk about the failings in Afghanistan and not the 20-year policy, not the argument about whether we should have stayed or should we go, but how we left. So I just want to play this little 3 minute clip, and then it ends, or in the middle of it, there is about a minute of snippets of Biden basically contradicting 2 weeks ago what he just said in this ABC interview that I just played. So now that the chips have fallen, the cards have been dealt. The chips are on the table. Yeah, whatever the case may be. I fucked up my euphemism. Now that's happening, it's like, well, it was a foregone conclusion. We always knew that the Taliban was going to take over, and, if the government was going to fall, they were just going to fall. Well, 2 weeks ago, he was basically saying that was an impossibility. So I just wanted you to listen to this little 2 or 3 minute clip because I listened to this podcast yesterday and I thought it was great.
Well, let's start with how bad a disaster this is, how big a disaster this is. Top of the Sunday New York Times, free fall in Afghanistan. General Jack Keane, who orchestrated the surge, he was the architect of the surge in Iraq back in the day, calls this astounding and humiliating. Ryan Crocker, former U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan under Obama, calls it an indelible stain on Biden's presidency. Kevin McCarthy, an embarrassment for our nation. Axios, even the press getting in on it, saying a stunning failure for the West, an embarrassment for Biden. I could go on. And you say?
Well, I think all of those descriptions are appropriate. It's a disaster, and it is not acceptable or meaningful to respond to that sort of criticism by saying, well, what do you want to do then? Just stay forever, given that what we're talking about here is not the decision to stay or go, but the manner in which it was done, which was botched in a way no foreign policy execution has been botched in decades.
The comparisons to Vietnam abound today, his Saigon moment. But before we get to that, the Biden promises. I mean, if you look back on Biden's history, and I remember when he was saying we should divide Iraq into 3 or 4 different states. Remember this? I mean, he's just been so out there on foreign policy for so long and so wrong. But unfortunately now he's actually president. So he gets to put these ideas into action. And you called him out for this in a column yesterday. It's been making the rounds, but we put together a budded soundbite of his predictions about what would happen in Afghanistan and more importantly, what wouldn't happen. And well, let's talk about how wrong they were. Listen.
Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
So what is the level of confidence that they have that it will not collapse?
The Afghan government and leadership has to come together. They clearly have the capacity to sustain the government in place.
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not. Because you have the Afghan troops have 300,000 well-equipped, as well-equipped as any army in the world, and an air force, against something like 75,000 Taliban. It is not inevitable.
Mr. President, some Vietnamese veterans see echoes of their experience in this withdrawal in Afghanistan. Do you see any parallels between this withdrawal and what happened in Vietnam, with some people feeling?
None whatsoever. Zero. The Taliban is not the North Vietnamese army. They're not remotely comparable in terms of capability. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of an embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It is not at all comparable.
You've spoken to the fact that the Taliban are sort of at their militarily strongest point that you've seen in 20 years. How do you feel personally about that, with the benefit of hindsight and all of the dollars and investments and American troops that were sent there?
Relative to the training and capacity of the ANSF and the federal police, they're not even close.
Wow.
Yep.
So I just wanted to play that to contrast the first clip that I showed you, where he's like, well, it was inevitable. You know, the military fell and the president left and whatever. And, you know, I think it's insulting for a couple reasons. I think it's insulting because, you know, the Afghans who laid down their arms and didn't have some massive bloody fight against the Taliban, what do you want them to do, right? So the United States has been there for 20 years, telling them, training them, fighting alongside of them, saying, hey, man, we're in this with you. We're here to the end. We're going to make sure the Taliban doesn't take over. And then one day, Trump just announces, yeah, we're going to be out by May 1st. And then and then Biden says, well, yeah, let's extend that to September 11th, right? What kind of PR bullshit is that, where you're like, well, I'm just going to arbitrarily extend this and all of our troops will be out by 9/11. And I want to get my photo op as the president saying, see, I'm the one who ended the 20-year war. And then everything just falls apart quickly because the Taliban knows, oh, you have a hard exit date. You're starting to draw down troops. Let's just go, right? It's like, it's game time. It's their Super Bowl. They're going to try to run amok and just start taking back more and more positions as the troops are drawing down. Whereas, as I mentioned, and this is really a testament to the United States military, that just keeping 2,500 people, 5,000 people in country the last few months has been enough to basically keep the country stable. Afghanistan's fucking huge, right? You just heard him talk about how there was 75,000, presumably, well-armed Taliban troops, and they were effectively minding their P's and Q's until we drew down and we kind of let it be known that we're completely getting out of Dodge. And so I feel bad for these Afghan troops. And then, you know, there's this, I found this on News 18, which I don't know anything about News 18, but I found their information pretty reliable and they had some really cool infographics. They talked about how U.S. armed the Taliban, right? And now the Taliban has Black Hawk helicopters and they have tanks and they have what's called AMRAPs, which are military armored vehicles. But what's interesting, there's some interesting ads over here, which leads me to believe this is not a particularly newsworthy site, but whatever, they had good infographics. And then, you know, this is interesting, and this is going to tie back into why I feel bad for the Afghan troops. This was, Taliban seizes enormous amount of costly U.S. Military hardware that we abandoned. So you've got a bunch of Taliban troops taking these military armored vehicles and whatnot. And then there was this Twitter vehicle posted on the Taliban leader's website which is crazy to me that the leader of the Taliban, you know, the people who like steal children and stone women and throw homosexuals off of roofs and cut off hands for thievery, you know, he has a Twitter page. Our former president does not, but that's another conversation. This is interesting. So this is basically them taking over, presumably, I would guess, although it hasn't been verified, Bagram Air Force Base and some other outposts of the Taliban military. And yeah, they're getting Blackhawks, they're getting tanks, whatnot. But how this plays back over to the Afghan military laying down their weapons is one of the most important things you can have in war is air support, right? Close air support, where helicopters and or planes can help you win the day by just hammering the opposition. And if you've seen any movie from Black Hawk Down to anything having to do with Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, you'll see that a vast majority of the insertion of troops, the extraction of troops, it happens on helicopters, right? The close air support, the way having military superiority in the sky has basically been proven since World War II on how you win a war, minus Vietnam. And what happened was when we started pulling out our troops and pulling out our military contractors, there weren't people there to service the aircraft. So let's say you're the you're the Afghan National Army. You see the Taliban advancing, and what you were trained for and what you were rehearsed for is like, well, we're going to move and maneuver, and we're going to fight back, and we're going to have close air support, and the helicopters are going to wipe out the Toyota trucks with rocket launchers on the top, and they're going to wipe out advancing troops. And now you look up and you have no air support. So you have no air support. The country that trained you and has stood by you and kind of used their leadership expertise to lead you over the last year is now completely abandoned you. And the Taliban is using Twitter and WhatsApp, American companies, by the way, who banned our president, our former president. They're using those communication tools to tell everybody, hey, lay down your arms and go home peacefully, or we can chop off your arms and burn your family. So what do you think you're going to choose when your allies, all the allied forces, are just leaving out the back door? So I can't really take issue with these soldiers that laid down their arms. And now what we're going to see, there's a really interesting mirror.co.uk. They have a whole section of their website just totally committed to. And by the way, the Mirror is a very partisan news source, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. And they have a whole section where they report like the craziness of Sharia law. And for those of you that don't know, the Quran is effectively the Bible for Muslims. It has all of their religious teachings, and then Sharia law is derived from that, and that's kind of their set of laws that they have either taken directly from the Quran or that they have established over time or they have adopted culturally. And the Mirror does a good job of showing these stories of the outcomes of Sharia law. You know, women caned in public for having sex outside of marriage. And by the way, that's getting off easy because in Afghanistan, you can now stone a woman to death for having sex outside of marriage. There's some other stories in here about gay people can be whipped or stoned to death in Brunei under the guise of Sharia law. There was one story on here where a woman was denied her inheritance of $500,000 from her family because she's a woman, so women don't have rights in Sharia law, especially for inheritance. So the money went to some other family member that was a male, even though there was something in place for the $500,000 to be sent to the daughter. Let's see. Saudi Arabia is considering crucifying a teen for a bicycle protest when he was just 10 years old. I mean, these are the things that the Taliban are going to bring back to Afghanistan. And by the way, if you're in the camp of, we're not the world police, it's not our job to, push Western ideology on people. It's not our job to, be the candle of light for women's rights or rights of children in the world. Okay, I can kind of understand that isolationist policy. But once you're there, once you're already there, the damage is done. Then you have to do the best job you can do with what you have. And it seemed like for the last 18 months, the best job that we could do is by helping keep the country intact by keeping a small stabilizing force of U.S. soldiers there. And it's so disappointing. And with the arms that they've seized, right, somewhere, who knows what the real number is, it's in the billions of dollars of tanks and AMRAPs, those armored vehicles, Blackhawks, all kinds of machine guns. I saw a picture posted again on the same Twitter site about just like these caverns of AR-15s and SAWs, which are M240s, just like huge like storage units, or those, what do they call those things that come off the ship down in Long Beach? Why can't I think of this? Containers, storage containers, right? That's what they're called? Yeah, shipping containers. That's the word I was looking for. Shipping containers. Just huge shipping containers with all kinds of weapons in them that we basically abandoned at Bagram Air Force Base. And so the Taliban just walked in there, took all of these weapons, released the 5,000 terrorists that were in jail there. And then as they came up on Kabul, they're like, hey, we already won. Your people, they abandoned you. We're going to kill you and your family. Just lay down your weapons, right? And they had a pretty bloodless confrontation in Afghanistan to take back the entire country. And here's the problem of leaving and not having a sphere of influence or a military base or an airstrip in that area is now the Taliban is armed with our weapons, right? They're going to be super excited to plan some type of, I hate to say it, and I hate to trivialize it, they're going to plan some type of future 9/11. Now, whether our intelligence agency can stop them or if we're a little bit more alert and aware of the fact that we can have a terrorist attack on U.S. society, or if Homeland Security is going to do the job for which they were established 20 years ago, I hope so. I hope there's never a terrorist attack in the United States. I don't want to have a see, I was right moment, right? I don't want to ever have that moment in America, and I'll be very sad if that happens. But if I was a gambling man, and I am, I would say it's going to happen at some point in the future, and we will be back to fighting these people, but we will be back to fighting a much better armed version of the Taliban, because now they have 1 billion, 50 billion, 60 billion, who knows what the number is, amount of our weapons and our military grade equipment. And it's just tragic, and I think it could have been handled better on the long haul, and the drawdown could have definitely been handled better. And I just fear that we're going to see ongoing stories over the upcoming weeks and months about, interpreters who worked alongside the Americans being either jailed, murdered, or their hand cut off. I think we're going to see a strong return to Sharia law, where now women can't go to school and they're effectively treated as property, and they're either caned or beaten or stoned to death if they don't cover their entire body and or, cheat on their husband. It's just really tragic. And it's to the point where it's really had me, it's just in my stomach in knots, and it's made me feel physically ill for everybody who fought there, whether they were a U.S. citizen, a multinational force, or whether it was an Afghan, that, the country was headed in the right direction. And even NPR, which is definitely no mouthpiece for the right-wing political sphere, it's pretty left-wing. Even NPR did this just tragic 30-minute podcast on The Daily, which is their daily podcast. It's very good, by the way, about one of the reporters they had on staff had become really close with a woman in Kabul who had been very vocal about the new Afghanistan, very vocal against the Taliban. And they had voice recordings from Telegram or Signal where the reporter was asking her questions, and then when she could get to Wi-Fi, she would respond. And so they just played the question and answer. And I think it was last Thursday or Friday they posted it. Maybe it was it might have been Monday by now. Maybe you can look that up, Chris, and we can put a link in there, the NPR, where they were interviewing the lady in Kabul. And you could just hear the despair in her voice of, starting last Wednesday or Thursday, hey, it looks like the Taliban might take over. We had to flee our house and leave all our worldly possessions. The Taliban's taking over. Now we're trying to find refuge here and hide here. Now we're here. Now we're trying to get to the airport. Oh, there's all these forms we have to fill out that I can't do because I don't have a computer. And then you can just feel the desperation in her voice escalating to, by the time she left the last message on Saturday or Sunday, that lady pretty much knows her and her family are dead. When they get found, because she was a very, very outspoken member of the new Afghanistan and very outspoken against the Taliban and Sharia law and the oppression of women, she's dead. I mean, if she doesn't get to an air base where they can extract her, because apparently they are still extracting thousands of Americans, American contractors, U.S. soldiers, and some Afghan nationals who I think there's like 10,000 right now on the way to the base in Texas for processing of amnesty immigrants. Unless she can get out, I don't think that lady's going to survive. And it's pretty horrific and it's pretty tragic. and, you know, all the hopes and prayers, even though I'm not a religious person, with the people in Afghanistan that tried to stand up for something new and unfortunately are going to be under Taliban rule for the foreseeable future. And I think they'll be under Taliban rule until something so dramatic happens, we're back there again, or we're back to something in the region, because, you know, you got to have stabilizing forces. Japan, Germany, Italy, they just didn't change overnight. That's why, you know, almost 80 years after the end of World War II, we still have full-time sources there. We still have full-time bases there. We still have full-time military there, because it takes that long to help a nation get on better footing. And if you agree that Western values are better or superior to a more strict Muslim interpretation of Sharia law, then this is just going to be something that continues and continues and continues to haunt us and be part of the civil discourse and be part of world politics. So I'm hoping for the best. I'm not particularly optimistic. I feel for the people in Afghanistan, and those are my limited and somewhat uneducated, but researched thoughts. If you stuck around this long, thanks so much. You know what to do, although you've probably already do it. Hit the like button, watch another video, subscribe, find us in the Facebook group On the Edge Podcast, and we'll talk to you soon. Love you guys lots. Bye.